Today we will have a couple of speakers. We'll start with, before he gets going, will be a short clip prepared by Salam for Democracy and Human Rights, a couple minutes, and then Jawad Fayrouz, who's the director, will speak for about 10 minutes, I think. Yeah. And then we might have another short clip, just another short one.
Yes.
3
minutes.
And then we'll have David from Article 19 and Rebecca from RSF.
Thank you very much. I'm happy and pleased to see you here with us and highly evaluate your participation today with us in this event. We got together today to launch this report. As you see the title, Bahrain, Deepening a Spiral of Repression. This report actually is a teamwork where many people have been involved, either in the ground in Bahrain or here in London, and we got engaged with some victims that they can give us their testimony. Definitely whatever we write and whatever we record, it will not cover the actual human rights violations going on in Bahrain. But definitely to cover part of it, better to not to cover anything. For us, we think that 2008 is one of the very worst years that human rights violations been escalated. We thought when the martial law has been ended in almost, it was in June 2011, and when BICI team started their work, and then they submitted their report, BICI report, to the King in November 2011. We thought that this is end of all the atrocities and all horrifying human rights violation happened by the authorities. And we thought that maybe the recommendations of BICI will be taken seriously. In the same time, when we thought, when we found that Human Rights Council later on, they submitted 176 recommendations to Bahraini authorities after a year almost. We thought that some plan gonna be to adopt at least human rights reform. We know that it is some complication is there to implement political reform by the government, and unfortunately, and this is what been said even by the allies of Bahraini government, mainly UK. So, but it looks like now, after 8 years of the uprising and almost after 7 years of submission of these recommendations, still we are going back backward and not forward. And we can analyze the major recommendation of BICI. You can see almost the major ones are not being implemented, And beside that, so many other horrific type of human rights violation, which was not there in 2011. Now we can see it. So in this report, I will just make a summary to let our colleague, rest of the colleague, to mention their own views. The outline of it, executive summary, infographic, executive summary, just a summary of it in an infographic way. Background, methodology, arbitrary revocation of citizenship in Bahrain. This is one of the worst cases that we've seen after the submission of BICR report. During that time, such policy was not being adopted to punish the victims by revoking their nationality, but since November 2012 it started. And then death penalty as political punishment, this one the same thing. Has been escalated, and we can come to some statistics and figure on this one. Use of torture and ill treatments, it was not as a rare cases, it's becoming a systematic, and yet we daily can hear and we can get the testimony of many, many victims that how they are being tortured. Restrictions on the rights to freedom of expression. As you are aware, even MPs are being detained just because they wrote a tweet, and we can give many, many examples. One of them, clear one, is Nabil Rajab, for example. No free, not fair elections. As everyone knows that Bahrain had parliamentary and municipality elections in November last year, but we believe that it was not free and not fair. We can give, and already we published a full report to show that it was not transparent, it was not based on the one man, one vote, it was not leading to the concrete reform, and so on. Restrictions on the right to the freedom of assembly, it was and it is continuing, and Bahrain maybe it is only country in this earth, in this planet, that they are not allowing by the law to have any type of assembly in the capital. They issued a legislation on this. Freedom of movement within the country and even outside the country. There are so many checkpoints, so many people, they cannot go around the country so easily. And what happened, for example, a year back in Duraz area was so clear that under the siege, so many areas could be controlled. Migrant rights, this is another issue that we tackled in last year. But due to the short time, I'm not going into details. Then we have some recommendations. So I can summarize it in a way of what we done it in the report. Arbitrary arrest, figure that we have more than 4,000 detainees in Bahrain, and daily you can see so many people being arrested, not just youth. We can see someone underage, we can see women being arrested, and we can see some people even older than 60 years old, the senior citizen being arrested. And the arrest, it is like a routine habit. Day by day we can see, and we can record many, many people. Within a year, I can imagine that it is exceeding hundreds. But now we have behind the bar more than 4,000 detainees. Citizenship revocation. As I mentioned, it started in November 2012, but the maximum year we got revocation of citizenship was 2018. Almost it was double than it was in 2017. It's around 300 citizens, they lost their citizenship. The exact figure is 298, and it is continuing yet. Within a couple of months, for example, more than 15 citizens, their nationality has been stripped. It started with the royal decree, but later on, the government, they expanded the authority of many other legislation bodies, for example, to revoke the nationality. For example, the judges now easily they can revoke the nationality, because if they say that he been in charge in any quote-unquote anti-terrorist act. And meanwhile, the power has been given to the Minister of Interior to revoke the nationality, and easily, for example, if any citizens wanted to stay abroad for more than 5 years and then come back to the country, he have right, the Minister of Interior, to revoke the nationality of that citizen. And definitely, whoever they have doubt in his loyalty to the government, then they've been given the right to the Minister of Interior to revoke his nationality. So it's becoming a very, very big issue, and so many side effects, bad effects, and whenever you lose your nationality, definitely you will not have any basic right as a citizen, services, and so on. And later on, you will be expelled out of the country, and this is what we faced last year. Many of those who've been victim of this type of atrocities, they've been forcibly being expelled out of the country. Travel bans, many human rights defenders, many political activists has been travel bans, them or their family in so many cases. Yes, now maybe the number has been reduced somehow, but it is a policy. Wherever they want to control any activist anywhere, definitely the travel ban is there. And part of them were many lawyers, as I believe. Death penalty, since 2011, the number exceeded 40 verdicts. Later on, some of them, their verdicts been changed from death penalty to life sentences. But just in 2018, we had 26 cases of death penalty. And yet, some of them, we have now 5, which there's already, they exceeded all judiciary process. Then if any time, if the king approved the death penalty, then they will be executed. As anyone, as all of us knows that in 15 March 2017, 3 youth, they've been executed for giving some accusation against them that they've been charged on some, as a government they said it was a terrorist act or so on, but everyone knows that there is no fair trial in Bahrain, and all confessions they're under torture, and totally they were innocent. We have torture and ill treatment. I can refer here to the anti-torture committee within the United Nations body, which they submitted their report after they met with the delegation of Bahrain in July 2017. And in that report, clearly they mentioned that there is a systematic torture in Bahrain, and it is still continuing. And we recorded such victims who've been under torture in so many cases in 2018, and it was similar way that we had it, a torture, all type of the torture, humiliation, beating, sexual harassment, and threatening their families, and definitely keeping them in the isolated cell, and so on. So the significance of 2018 was sentencing the Sheikh Ali Salman, leader of the opposition, and he was definitely been acquitted at the first court, but on the appeal court, and even unfortunately even in cassation court, he been life imprisonment to the rest of his life. And it was so strange that on the first court, when he been acquitted, in the appeal court, no other evidence is being given on the charges of conspiracy against the government and contacts with Qatar. We know that it was a false execution, and at the same time, the way the government wanted to engage the GCC conflict with or Saudi and UAE conflict and Bahrain conflict with Qatar in this case, and such case that you can see that Sheikh Ali Salman became victim of it. Yes, okay. Nabil Rajab, I think everyone followed his case. Then through all the judiciary process and through cascation, they already sentenced him for 5, and earlier he'd been sentenced for 2 years. So altogether, we can see that how the government is using the judiciary process to target politicians, human rights activists, and so on. And the last one was one of the former MPs, that Ashiri, he was just because he made some tweet, he expressing his view about the elections, then he been detained. Now once again he been sentenced for 6 months. So in short, we have focused in this report on the election, how it was not free and it was not leading to any type of the reforms, and part of it was political isolations where all the members of the opposition been banned from votes, and the most, what they call them, they are leaders of these political societies, they are being banned even from nominating themselves for any post, and the total ban of 2 political societies, Wa'ad and Al-Wafaq, is being made as granted. Thank you. This is just short. We have it, this our full report in Arabic and English in our website. Now it is already there. You can see it. Thank you.
All right, the next speaker will be David, I'm going to mispronounce your name again, Diaz-Rogates. He's the Director of Programs at Article 19. It's a freedom of expression NGO based in London and elsewhere. And I think he's going to talk to us about his expression map.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation to Salam for Democracy and Human Rights to invite us to talk at this event. We're very happy to participate and contribute. As a freedom of expression organization, we have been engaging not as much as we would like to in terms of exposing human rights violations in Bahrain. I think it's more of a lack of capacity than actual that reflecting the situation in the ground. Just yesterday we called on the Thai authorities not to extradite Hakim al-Araibi, and we are doing some advocacy on the Thai side on this regard. And I won't mention cases because I know Rebecca will be some of the cases that I think we have been working on. What I wanted to do, and also to mention, like for example, we did submit a universal periodic review on reviews on Bahrain in 2017, not only on specific cases but also the legal tools of repression that goes from the law on the press law, the law on public gathering, the law on political associations, the penal code, and the anti-terrorism legislation. What I wanted to do today is to present you with a bit of a larger picture of where Bahrain sits in the larger perspective in terms of comparing that with other countries in the world and in the region. And for that is making reference to the Expression Agenda report that we issued last year, where we have basically created a map that reflects freedom of expression and access to information across the world. So each of these flowers represent the country, and Bahrain sits way here, very close to North Korea. So in terms of the methodology, what we have gathered is data that is being shared by the Varieties of Democracy, which is a social studies institute in Stockholm that gathers indicators about the quality of democracy. So we have pick and choose some of those indicators that relate to the 5 areas that we think represent freedom of expression and access to information, starting from protection of freedom of expression and journalists, civic space, and looking at the quality of protest, digital censorship, media, and transparency. So obviously the larger and brighter the best of the performance is, and the smaller and darker the worse is it. Just wanted to take back into 2016, that's the previous picture, and even going back into 2006, a much more general, brighter picture about what's the status of freedom of expression across the world. And back into 1987, where how freedom of expression actually looks. So this is when we had a wall, dividing Europe, where Mandela was still in prison, and if there were mobile phones, they look more like a brick, hence there's no indicator in terms of digital. So if that's more of a bit of a comparative of how largely freedom of expression has evolved and how things have actually moved generally forward, yet from 2016 to 2018, the situation is becoming a bit darker, So I just wanted to look at Turkey very quickly on how Turkey, it presented a complicated but relatively positive figure, and how in the course of 10 years the situation has deteriorated. Also wanted to look at how Tunisia looked during the Ben Ali regime, and as a result of the not only the revolution but actual political changes into legislation that the Tunisian authorities has led, has brought us into a much more brighter picture, So we're looking at Bahrain from 91 to 2018, there is barely no positive, but rather all different indicators continue to be negative or even going further down, So while I gave you the larger picture on how things have evolved and the rest of the world has become far more open in terms of freedom of expression, what we can see in Bahrain, that we are just still, they were having a very bad starting point, and it's even going even further down, So this is more of a quick analysis of where the different trends are going. You can see on 2007 where things were a bit more positive, but how the tendencies is going down, And also just to put Bahrain with some of the countries in the region, we can actually look at Egypt and Saudi Arabia, great allies of the West. And what's the picture in terms of freedom of expression, and Bahrain in there. We can look at Iran, where it's a really complicated picture, it's very problematic, and then other countries like Tunisia, Lebanon, or Morocco that gives it's just for opening the conversation rather than a very specific analysis, but it depicts that in Morocco, Lebanon, or Jordan, there are definitely issues, but there is still space to operate. And just last but not least, just to, I think it's here. I think we had it open. So bear with me one little second. Wanted to point you to, so we had it open. We had it open to prepare, and of course these things always go a bit wrong. So in our website, what? This is going to take too long, oh, there you go. So basically, you have the latest. There you go. Oh, sorry. So basically, this is the latest map of freedom of expression, and we're going to take a look at the Middle East, North Africa, where you can then see which countries in the region are, and then you can actually see Bahrain there, way out down. We have from Tunisia to Palestine, Oman, so countries in the region, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Qatar, and Egypt, very close, So here, if you click down, you will see the some of the tendencies. The other thing I really want to present, and with this I actually do finish, I promise, is basically looking at the 5 areas where actually countries perform. Just give me 1 second. So, we have been talking about Tunisia. So you can see Tunisia very high in terms of the scale, and with some ups and downs that nuance a bit. That there are tendencies, whether going up or down. You can see on digital, But then you can actually look at other countries in the region. When you actually look at Bahrain, this is the actual picture in terms of the tendencies, And you can actually see, I don't know if you can actually see where the starting point was before those, in 2007, So there's a very clear dip that an already fairly problematic picture where things are, So I'll leave it there.
That's fascinating.
Thank you.
So Rebecca has done a lot of work on Azerbaijan and has joined us repeatedly. Those of us who have been taking part in activities outside the Saudi Arabian embassy following the shocking murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Her organization, RSF, based in Paris, does work throughout the globe, throughout the world, and I think she's looking for the Bahrain page, which may or may not want to come up.
So I'm here on behalf of Reporters Without Borders, which is known internationally as Reporters Sans Frontières. Our mandate is focused on press freedom, so we work on to support journalists, citizen journalists, journalistic sources. Bahrain has one of the world's worst records on press freedom, ranked 166th out of 180 countries on our World Press Freedom Index. The countries towards the bottom of the index don't tend to move much in terms of ranking year to year, but you can look on our website at the specific scoring and you'll see that Bahrain has been very steadily eroding over the years. We currently know of 15 journalists and citizen journalists unjustly jailed in the country in connection with their journalistic activities. I might just touch on a few of these cases. Nabil Rajab was mentioned earlier, of course, who's now recently had his 5-year sentence upheld by the Court of Appeals, but this is a second sentence, of course, because he was previously sentenced to 2 years in prison. Both of these sentences are connected to his work as a human rights defender and a citizen journalist, and the 5-year sentence directly connected to some tweets. And so we emphasize that tweeting is not a crime, blogging is not a crime, journalism is not a crime. Nabil should be immediately released along with the other 14 jailed journalists and citizen journalists in the country. I want to mention the case of Najah Yusuf, a human rights defender and blogger. We recently joined a letter with a number of other human rights and freedom of expression organizations calling for her release. She reports being tortured in custody, very disturbing claims here that have not been properly investigated. She's serving a 3-year sentence in connection with calling for protests around the 2017 Bahrain Grand Prix. I also want to mention the case of photographer Hassan Mohammed Gambar, who was sentenced to more than 100 years in prison on a wide range of absurd charges, ranging from burning tires to causing damage to an electricity tower, rioting, and association with a terrorist organization. But Reporters Without Borders considers all of these charges against him to be connected with his journalism, and he should also be immediately and unconditionally released. The issue of citizenship was raised earlier. I want to mention that specifically in the context of journalists. We know of at least 7 Bahraini journalists who, since 2011, have illegally had their citizenship stripped, leaving them stateless. 3 of these journalists are currently in prison in Bahrain, and the other 4 have been forced into exile abroad, like some of you here. And many of you know Bahrain better than me, but I want to emphasize for those who don't know the country as well that that also has implications for the children of these individuals, because citizenship rights come from the father. So, for example, the jailed journalists who have been stripped of their nationality, their children, some have had children that were born since they've been imprisoned, who actually are then stateless persons themselves and cannot access healthcare, schools, services like this. So this is certainly an issue, and in fact a wide range of the violations that are covered in this report also of course apply to journalists, but our focus is just a bit more narrow. Since we're here in the UK, I also want to mention the UK's role in all of this, because quite frankly we're not doing enough. We should be taking a stronger stand as a country on human rights issues, not just in Bahrain but in the entire Gulf. Too often we're in fact enabling repression rather than taking a stand for these cases. So when we give visiting Bahraini dignitaries literally the red carpet treatment, when King Hamid is coming to the Royal Windsor Horse Show and sitting next to the Queen, in fact when that same horse show is taking sponsorship from the Bahraini government, that sends absolutely the wrong signal about the UK's priorities in this country and in this region. And sometimes our own behaviour here is not good enough. So these cases that I'm about to mention are a bit outside of RSF's mandate, but just to highlight. So human rights defender Saeed Ahmad Al-Waidi, who many of you will know, was given asylum here in the UK, but actually the Home Office's lack of action in his daughter's case has rendered her stateless here in the UK. So this is somebody that we've offered refuge to as a country, but yet his daughter has been left in this uncertain situation, and his relatives continue to be imprisoned and tortured in Bahrain. Ali Mushema was left to sleep rough on the streets of London outside the Bahraini embassy on hunger strike for, what, 44 days was it? It takes that kind of action to actually mobilize any attention to these grave issues here, and that's not good enough. So we need more action by our parliament, by our foreign office. We cannot simply choose which countries to turn a blind eye to these sorts of violations based on other interests that we have. So I guess my message would be to the UK government, in addition to the Bahraini government, to immediately release these people and to cease persecution of those who express critical opinions. Also to our government here to take a stronger stand for this and to make it clear that human rights and freedom of expression also matter in our bilateral relations. And of course, I believe that Formula One also has a responsibility to raise these cases more than it does. We were encouraged to see that they finally expressed concern about the case of Najah Yusuf, whom I mentioned, but they're in a position actually to influence more than they are, and continuing to hold races in the country in the midst of this repression without speaking out on it is actually only serving to enable that repression. So I believe that they have a responsibility, and the international public who is attending these races, who is watching these races, the teams, the sponsors, they all bear some responsibility here and should be using the platform they have to call for reforms, to call for the release of these unjustly jailed journalists, citizen journalists, and others. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, I think good to mention that we have 3 Bahraini journalists who are with us today in this room, and all 3 their nationalities been revoked. We have Yasser Sayed here, we have here Abu Arij, Safwan, Abbas Safwan, and you have Dr. Saeed Shahabi, all of 3 journalists and their nationalities being revoked.
Thanks, Rebecca. That kind of wraps us up. That wraps up the presentations. I just want to pick up on one very quick point. As Jawad also put up a picture of Hakim Al-Arabi. Rebecca was saying that she felt that the British government could do more, and there's more they can do. As an observation, I'll say that we, Salam for Democracy and Human Rights, has sought a meeting with the FCO since about October, and have been rebuffed on about 5 occasions. In contrast, and this might be interesting in the present climate, in contrast with the European External Action Service, which is positively engaged with work on Bahrain, on Saudi Arabia, and so on, and expressed quite an interest of that. And here is Hakim's picture. Does anyone in the room not know this case? Right, that will be. You don't know the case? Do you want to give the summary?
You give summary.
Right, to the best that I know, Hakim Al-Arabi was obviously a footballer. He was on the Bahraini national team. In October or November of last year, I think it was, having been granted asylum in Australia, he went on a honeymoon to Thailand. And actually, anyone pitch in when I get this wrong, let me know. When an erroneously issued Interpol red notice had him arrested, the Thai authorities arrested him and detained him, pursuant to a extradition request from Bahrain. The first hearing of which I think was yesterday or the day before yesterday. And they have admitted that it is, not admitted, it's been considered admissible, and therefore he's being detained for a further 60 days for the 2 sides, as it were, the side for him to be granted asylum and for the Bahraini authorities to bring their evidence, at which time the case will be decided. I understand that there's been considerable interest from, in particular, Australia, where he has been granted asylum, including from government members, including the Prime Minister, I think. But in particular, like former captain of the the Australian football team, Craig Foster, and various others, Sophie McNeil from the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, who've done quite a lot of campaigning work. Human Rights Watch has supported it. Amnesty has supported his case. I should think other organizations in the regions, maybe your colleagues out there, are probably involved in some way or another. The essential charge against him, again, as I understand it, is that he took part in in an action which violated public property, and the rebuttal is that he was actually on TV that night playing football. It was a televised football game. So I don't know if that could be a contested area. I'm not sure. But certainly Salam for Democracy and Human Rights and other Bahraini-focused activists have been doing quite a lot, and indeed many Australian football teams, to have him return to Australia as soon as possible. Thank you for coming.
Sorry.
Yeah, I was moving to questions.
To make a point to Rebecca and to the great work you folks are doing, but Al-Wasat, which was the only independent media outlet in the entire Gulf region, was shuttered coming up. I think it was in August of 2017. I think I've got my dates right. And I think that at the time there was very little conversation about it. It basically was allowed to happen, and the journalists who worked for that media outlet were subject to all sorts of harassment. The editor was subject, as you know, the co-founder was beaten to death in 2011 in detention. I just wanted to raise that because I don't think we should forget Al-Wasat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.
Comments?
Anyone else have anything they'd like to say?
I'm Joy Hurain, and I'm head of advocacy at Index on Censorship, which campaigns on freedom of expression, including media freedom. And I want to start by very much echoing Rebecca's comments about the lack of press freedom and other comments. I want to briefly mention that Nabil Rajab is one of the winners of Index's Freedom of Expression Award that we award each year to outstanding campaigners for freedom of expression. We continue to campaign on his behalf, so we welcome this event. I wanted to come back to the point that Rebecca made and that you also touched on about the UK and the UK's role in enabling or sustaining or not doing enough to challenge some of these regimes. And I wanted to very much agree with those remarks, and I wanted to strongly encourage Salam DHR not to give up just because you haven't been given a meeting with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office or others yet, but to continue pushing. This is a year when the UK will be hosting a media freedom conference and campaign, so issues related to media freedom and freedom of expression are high on the agenda. They will be in the public eye, and I think it's a year when all of us need to continue pushing for that. Thank you.
Jordan, can you just tell us a little bit what Index and maybe what you two will be doing on this? I don't know about this media freedom initiative by the UK government. Click your things.
I mean, we have been in contact with
More coming over.
with Jeremy Hunt and some of the people within the FCO that announced this new initiative by the British government to make the top priority of the FCO to make a campaign on media freedom across the world, which is obviously something that we welcome. Part of the issues that Jeremy Hunt is promising is that they want to make perpetrators of repression pay in terms of diplomatic terms, so we are taking that seriously. We take that for the value of the word they're giving, and we want to continue to engage with the FCO in order to make sure that then that results in the proper diplomatic action. We have been.
Did he say that?
He said. What the FCO is coming up in terms of wording is that they want to make perpetrators pay. So.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very pleased. I just, I'm a bit. I want to see how this is going to develop. What we would like is then making sure that this does not result in the supposed to be quiet diplomacy that normally I take quiet diplomacy as non-diplomacy, because we don't have the transparency of whether those type of messages has been put forward, but actually, very transparent criticism of, those who are perpetrators, and then having political consequences to it. So I would like to see how this is going to play out, but we're certainly going to, record what they have been saying. We look forward for the conference in July, where they want to make a big conference inviting different governments, and we want to really see some traction on this.
Could both of you just also very quickly at the end of that just comment, say what you're going to be doing?
Well, this is a recently announced initiative, so
Okay.
we're just preparing the ground. Yeah.
If I could just add on to that, so we've been in talks with the FCO about this campaign, so we're assured that it's going to be given significant priority. Jeremy Hunt indeed seems to be very serious about it. There's a whole team in place working now on this media freedom campaign. One thing that I have raised with them repeatedly in conversations in recent months is the need to ensure a more consistent approach country to country, because as you've experienced with Bahrain, it seems sometimes with allies that we have other interests with, that these issues are not given the same seriousness as in some other places where it's maybe not as politically or economically risky for the UK to raise these issues. So hopefully this will just be another channel now for communication on these issues. And we're assured that the guidance is being shared all over the world, so British missions all over the world should be now paying more attention and reacting more on cases of media freedom. Because we certainly share your frustrations. I mean, we do have meetings with country desks, regional teams and their heads all the time, but I have to say I've had frustrations myself with conversations related to Gulf states with the FCO in the past. So hopefully this is another channel to raise some of these issues.
So have they published, the FCO, have they published the 2018 Human Rights Report this year or not yet?
They published one in the summer. I don't know if that was for calendar year. That must have been the calendar year before. It was later this year than it normally is. I want to say it came out in July.
In the past, their annual report has always whitewashed Bahrain. And Lord Avery, the late Lord Avery wrote several times to them, there's no point of this report. Unlike the American, the US State Department report on human rights, which is specific and detailed. This FCO's report has always been hopeless and useless.
We share your frustration on that. So the difference between the two, so the State Department report is actually mandated to cover every country in the world apart from the United States, of course, which is its own issue. But the FCO report, what a number of international organizations have criticized is perceived lack of transparency in how the countries that are highlighted are chosen, because it doesn't go into every country in the world, of course, it picks some, and we've seen what we feel are some omissions as well. So that's something that we can certainly raise with the media freedom folks now. We're hoping that that they will actually help with other parts of the FCO. So that report won't be produced by this campaign, but hopefully what will happen now is greater attention to these issues throughout all parts of the FCO. And one thing that we're also pushing for is, as Reporters Without Borders, we've raised this in any case, for media freedom to not be compartmentalized off to the side, but for this to be streamlined. Because if this is a conversation that's only happening with the people working on media freedom, but states can go ahead in other areas of bilateral relations with the UK, then they're not going to take it seriously. But the worst offenders in particular should be hearing about this when they're talking about energy, when they're talking about trade, when they're talking about security. It should be brought up everywhere. Otherwise, nothing will change. It will be business as usual with just a bit more publicity to this issue for some time. But I have to say, based on our interaction so far, I'm cautiously optimistic that at least this is being given more seriousness than I've seen in the 2.5 years since we've opened our office here. But I guess time will tell.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
In part comment, in part.
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
My name is Hassan Hafid. I'm a lecturer at King's College, Middle East and Gulf Politics. I was researching in Bahrain in 2014 and 2015. I hate to be the cynic because I know we should all try to be optimistic, especially on human rights discourse. But I think, just following on from the last comment, there is really a concerted effort on the UK and Western powers, by extension, on their part to maintain repression. Because, end of the day, as we see in other contexts as well, especially this is a pressing case, a prevalent case in the Middle East, that human rights gets thrown by the wayside because of the prevailing geopolitical scenario. So one of the narratives that came out when I was interviewing government loyalist MPs in Bahrain, the constant narrative was one of scaremongering tactics, in the sense that it's all about the geopolitics, that we'll have a post-Iraq 2003 scenario where Iran et al. Will come in and control the country. This has been constantly and I'm sure, especially the Bahrainis here will be wary of this. This is what is essentially propaganda, because we know these claims are often quite inflated. I'm not trying to undermine any of the work and activism you do, and I wish there was more traction, especially in the media, especially in Western media, and that there may be a correlation there between in a post-Arab Spring context, why there's, why maybe Bahrain's media, lack of press freedom has deteriorated, coinciding with, kind of there being a lack of media traction in the West. But I guess my main topic is, unless we deal with the geopolitics at the heart of it, you can't really deal with human rights, and that is the sad reality. You can talk human rights till kingdom come, but the FCO, got more vested with arms companies now, the likes of the AE systems, for example. They're not, it's going to be turned down.
No, very valid points, and that's something that we fear might actually become exaggerated now as we Brexit and as we're sort of looking for other deals to replace the very good arrangement that we are currently walking away from. But I mean, we have to try, and I would point out there's also new tools available to us that didn't exist before that we could pursue. That don't necessarily, they're not necessarily contingent upon the FCO, things like Magnitsky legislation. So for those who aren't familiar with that, it's basically, we now have laws in the UK, this is part of a growing international trend, that can get at individual accountability for officials involved in acts of corruption and human rights abuses. So we've got this amendment here now in the UK that is not yet being implemented because it's been tacked on to the Government Sanctions Act, which will replace agreements that we have with the EU. So the Prime Minister has stated that the Magnitsky Amendment, along with the rest of the bill, will not be implemented until post-Brexit. But we have that tool. We have things now like unexplained wealth orders. We have ways of sort of getting at those with money in the UK or those with interest here. So I think that's something as human rights organisations that we can do more of, is pursue these newer tools of influence, really, and not just always rely on foreign offices and their equivalents in other countries to do this work for us. But we do need increased media attention. We need increased public attention to these issues to actually get anywhere. And I do share your cynicism in a way, but also with an optimistic slant, because we have to keep trying.
Do you think that may be a theme then in the near future, that international law may force the likes of the UK, who do have considerable leverage over Bahrain?
Well, I think the move towards individual accountability is really promising, and not just Bahrain but globally, because especially in the cases of the worst offenders who are no longer as sensitive to naming and shaming and the sort of more traditional means of human rights advocacy. And of course we're also all getting better as human rights organizations at other creative ways of campaigning. So whether it's, you guys in Bahrain have done a great job campaigning around the Formula 1 races, that's a great example. Or sometimes we're now engaging with the international financial instruments, because those that are lending money to these countries, these loans should come with strings attached, and you can get at reforms in that way. But it can be frustrating sometimes getting into new areas with bodies that don't necessarily see human rights as their responsibility. We have to change how we talk about it, transparency, good governance, sort of the anti-corruption, these sorts of things. But there are other tools out there, and I think that's it. We all need to adapt and sort of try new methods when the old methods aren't working.
David, did you want to add to that?
Just to add, I agree with the analysis, and I share the feeling. I think, as Rebecca has mentioned, I think, it's an issue of not only the perseverance in terms of exposing, but then, really looking at other avenues. From our point of view, that's where we not only talk about freedom of media, we talk about access to information and transparency, which is directly linked in terms of governance, and not only on the Bahraini authorities, but also many investors, whether that's the government of the UK or other governments or other companies, but then they are in a situation where they need to be much more transparent about the level of investment and interest that they have. So then we start putting the different pieces of the puzzle together and being able to held accountable, if not the Bahrain authorities, those that are actually investing and taking decisions on the side of human rights violations.
Thanks very much. That brings us to a close. We'd like to show a very quick clip in about 3 minutes, I think. Yeah. It's in Arabic, right?
تعميق دوامة القمع عنوان التقرير السنوي الذي تصدره منظمة سلام للديمقراطية وحقوق الانسان عن عام 2018، والذي شهد ارتفاعا حادا بانتهاكات حقوق الإنسان، أبرزها صدور الحكم بالسجن مدى الحياة على زعيم المعارضة الشيخ علي سلمان خلافا لحكم تبرئته الصادر عن محكمة الاستئناف، تأييد حكما مدته 5 سنوات ضد المدافع البحريني البارز نبيل رجب، استمرار وجود الكثير من نشطاء المجتمع المدني وراء القضبان، تجريد 298 بحرينيا من جنسيتهم، إصدار 26 حكما بالإعدام تغير 5 منها لاحقا. وتشير سلام إلى أبرز السياسات التي تؤدي مباشرة إلى انتهاك حقوق الإنسان، والمتمثلة بالإسقاط التعسفي للجنسية والذي كثفت منه السلطات خلال السنوات الأخيرة، استخدام الإعدام كعقوبة سياسية وتجاهل كل القوانين الدولية التي تحظرها، انتزاع الاعترافات بالإكراه ووفق محاكمات غير عادلة، استخدام التعذيب وسوء المعاملة في مراكز الاحتجاز، ومواصلة استخدام الإخفاء القسري كجريمة لنشر الرعب بين أفراد المجتمع. ويضاف إلى ذلك التعذيب الممنهج والمعاملة السيئة في السجون واستهداف المعتقلات وتقييد الحق بحرية التعبير وحظر السفر وغيرها من الحقوق المنتهكة في البحرين. سلام تطرقت بتقريرها إلى الانتخابات البرلمانية التي جرت في نوفمبر، والتي افتقدت لمعايير النزاهة والمساواة والعدالة في التمثيل السياسي، خصوصا في أعقاب حل الجمعيات السياسية وحظر مشاركة أي من أعضائها في العملية الانتخابية. كما أشار التقرير إلى قضيتي المدافع البارز عن حقوق الإنسان نبيل رجب وقضية زعيم المعارضة الشيخ علي سلمان. واختتمت المنظمة تقريرها بمجموعة من التوصيات، أبرزها إنهاء ممارسة إسقاط الجنسية على الفور وإعادة الجنسية إلى مئات المواطنين، إلغاء المادة 10 من قانون الجنسية لعام 1963 والتي تسمح لوزارة الداخلية بإسقاط جنسية الأشخاص، الوقف الفوري لإصدار عقوبة الإعدام وإلغاء جميع أحكام الإعدام الصادرة وإنهاء ممارسة تنفيذ العقوبة، الانضمام إلى البروتوكول الاختياري الثاني للاتفاقية الدولية للحقوق المدنية والسياسية والذي يلغي عقوبة الإعدام. أيضا الإفراج الفوري وغير المشروط عن جميع السجناء المحكوم عليهم بسبب ممارسة حقهم في حرية التعبير وتكوين الجمعيات، كذلك التقيد على الفور بالمادة 7 من العهد الدولي الخاص بالحقوق المدنية والسياسية والمادة 8 من الميثاق العربي لحقوق الإنسان التي تحظر التعذيب والعقوبة القاسية أو اللا إنسانية. توصيات تجدد سلام المطالبة بتنفيذها وتكرارها في حين يواصل النظام الترويج لنفسه كدولة تسير على طريق الإصلاح.
Regarding question, just small comments. I think part of the problem of the region, it is not just unelected governments or these ruling families. Part of the problem is wrong policy of the United Kingdom, United States, mainly. And I think after more than 40 years of independence of these countries, and it shows that this policy, which is backing the ruling families away from any process of the serious reform, lacking of that policy, I think this is the main challenge that they have to face it and change it. And it is so clear that with this wrong policy, they didn't not just freeze the problem or solve it, they increase the problem. I can give the example of Bahrain, where if we can say that if we had a political crisis or maybe a security crisis, it's led to later on to the human rights crisis, then it continued to the economical crisis, and even we have social crisis of this naturalization and so on. And part of it, it is not just being silent on by this power. They are being somehow supported, totally supported. We really feel that there is a hypocrisy in this way. The way they are dealing with the risk countries, that there is some uprising or people demanding reforms. You can name so many countries in the Middle East happened after the Arab Spring, and fully yet they are supporting these changes. But when it comes to Bahrain, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, even when it comes to the UAE and or name the rest of it, they are totally backing the regimes. So we understand that there is some geopolitics in the area, some conflict between, say, Iran and Saudi Arabia and that part. But who is, what is the position of these allies of these countries, especially UK, when they say that they have a long, whenever we talk with them, they say they have a long term of reforms, but this long term yet, we cannot see. We can see it is backward more than even giving any type of the real changes toward a serious reforms. Thank you.
Thanks, that brings us to an end. Help yourself to your coffee if you want. Otherwise, thanks for coming.